Chom den den jambe yong la sha za lo kange lo de dim ni ten de nye tra nam da rap sra ve chi nye deng gen che yin se che re ni je tu kra le bang se kong da si be zun re ma re men tam dung e che ze ve ro zoi kun la pu je tar ze yin la chu che yong den song Rudare Chedro Nimoni on Leje Chadron Runze Maria Musre Dungranu Chinye Junze Rajanam Dene Tajen Saju Tarsa Yunden Luzo Jase Tugu Chundra Chudan Chuni Jende Dalle Musen Jambe Yon La Zedene Cheche Chenra Vesrache Dalu Temu Membarab Sarane Kadan Denje Junglo Toba Ye Lodre Bobe Noa Sardu Solo Kange to years Raje Dawadam Ye Nambong Ba Tenjen de Yungtun Bagong Kodam Dala Daja Sal Jamia Shana Durje Chenreze Sai Nimbo Jaba Nam Brasare Namge Nimbo Shamba Kundozong Nyewe Seshin Jela Shaje Wo Sheje Kalla Chenrap Jinkuraje Zebe Dong Dirje Len Lapo Yarbe ten bakun ne samzebe kajurun boche la saje o sarp gundo sije tanye le tamge samme shag yong zong xin shang chum yin be lam gen karma ba mi je de be ji yu zu ge du la so tene ta a shang chup sem ge nyam ne Ten la pape, ten je, la lin so demande shua la, takazan sache tangbo de nro simbache, sache ni patala, gunzob chonju sem tang, dendam chonju sem ni, ten la pape nang ne, dendam chonju sem ji ne kapte, kasa gunzob chonju sem ji ne kapte, che, tel?
Dangpo ni tsar song a. Sakya Dangpo ni tsar song yang mena.
Mare Sakya Dangpo tsar ne, nuji Sakya ni pe kapla.
So the teaching concerns the continuation of the explanations set forth by Ngulshu Togme in his 37 practices of a Bodhisattva. Now, as has been explained at the beginning of this series of lectures, the text can be divided into three major parts. The first of the three concerned the introductory part, and we've already gone through that. We're now going through the second of the three major parts of the text, which concerns the various practices in the context of the so-called Bodhi mind, cultivating a mindset which takes the focus of attaining Buddha the enlightened state for the sake of benefiting all sentient beings. And the Bodhi mind has two perspectives, relative and absolute, and the teachings till now and the teachings that will be given today are concerned with the first of the two perspectives, and the second of the three major parts that we're going through in terms of the various parts of the text itself is the section or part of the text which sets forth the actual topic. in great detail, the topic being that of the body-mind, and how to train with respect to the body-mind, how to give rise to the body-mind, and then cultivate it in order to make progress on the path to enlightenment.
Tiyin tu tene nyamja tu nyamja te ta range janju sem gambe kabla ta nyamja tu khar kokundo sina thoma ni tu dagyin nyambe semte gamju kobe.
Now the practices explained previously, Daddy, Chupa nerva.
Dirva.
Chupa chuchitrava.
Chupa chuchi injire. Dungal malu daden de shongsengi de rebe.
Yes.
Ordinary.
The two practices explained in the previous session concerns what one may refer to as contemplative meditation, where one of the focuses that were explained is that of changing one's mindset from the regular worldly mindset, which sees one's own welfare as more important than the welfare of others, referred to as an imbalanced mindset. And the shift that one works to obtain in terms of one's mindset or worldview here, with respect to all sentient beings, is that one, to begin with, uses methods by way of which it becomes clear to one, the practitioner, that the welfare of others is equally important, so that selfish concerns are eradicated. And that then develops or that is achieved rather by way of a number of methods. Some of them were described in or taught in the previous session, some of these methods.
Penna shongchu sem senkente shamba tang ni je da shambe zawa jinji yin zang dagyin dene dagyin nyambe semde yabu je leb sona den dagyin jewe semde leb yokuyor.
So it's a matter of cultivating loving kindness and compassion for others to the extent, to begin with, where there has been a shift in one's mindset in terms of how one views one's own welfare in relation to the welfare of others, so that both are equally important to one. There isn't an emphasis on one's own welfare, happiness, good circumstances, and the like. That is then developed to a greater extent, where the result is that one, because of a greater shift as to one's mindset in this regard, becomes able to exchange one's own good circumstances for the suffering of others. And there, evidently, the mind shift concerns an even greater change, namely, the practitioner achieves a mindset which sees the welfare of others as more important than his own welfare. To the point where the practitioner is then able to sacrifice his own good circumstances for the suffering of others. As was explained in the previous session, here one can use the breathing process as a tool, as an aid in terms of developing loving kindness and compassion for others to the extent that one develops to the point where one is prepared to exchange one's own good circumstances for the suffering of others. So this is a process where the tool or the aid of the breathing process as well as other methods are used. The point of using the methods that are taught in this context is, or the purpose of them, is to enable the practitioner to achieve so-called boundless loving kindness, which would refer to the kind of loving kindness for others where the mindset or where the loving kindness for others is concerned with the welfare of others to the extent where the practitioner is able to exchange his own good circumstances for the suffering of others. And that concerns compassion as well. The purpose here is also to achieve so-called boundless compassion, compassion that knows no borders, a reference to the fact that compassion at this level knows no borders, has no limitations, in that the practitioner now sees the welfare of others as more important than his own. Kam dang dri sena dri de don chiki nam drang la kogo ere
marendine to se cheyo
kam
dang se de ta tongbote perna tongling ki big pa chene ta da yin jewa da chi na tongling ki big pa nyamba do chi na dewa to dunya kare yin ya da jin ni ka ki be cha la yin ba la so pal sam tang chen gam ge yor wa ta khan tar chi gam ge yor wa ti lo la chu kam chu ge ya tan di se de ya ko kam chu na ko ndi bo cha che ne ka tu yin na yang ro de gi na nda du de gi na nda sam khan na de na nda cho so li na nda permissive mbeza magyochi chagi jina Ji, Kam, Ji, Ten, Chebatre. Ten. Tene tempo chagu. Tene lalin to tartu chakra.
Det ge to göra.
Ta halam yetu byungur. Tempo chi charo chena.
So, there was the mention of contemplative meditation here, which is about resting in a balanced state. Here, the focus is on being balanced with respect to the welfare of others in connection with one's own circumstances. So there isn't the imbalance of the individual wanting more for himself and less for others, as it were. So that's what balanced state means in this context. And so-called meditation here, and with reference to other perspectives of reality as well, has three stages. There is the beginning stage, or beginner stage, where the practitioner trains in order to get used to another way of thinking, as it were. Whatever an individual does in general, he does with reference to something. And there are certain ideas and guidelines that he follows depending upon his lifestyle, his education, his circumstances. Here one tries to act according to the guidelines of the trainings a Bodhisattva does, for the sake of developing loving kindness and compassion for others, for the sake of benefiting others. So a beginner practitioner, of course, isn't used to that lifestyle, as it were, or that way of thinking, because it doesn't really accord with the general worldly lifestyles and ways of thinking that one usually entertains. So it's a matter of training in order to get used to a new way of thinking, a new way of conducting one's life, as it were, where the main focus is the welfare of all sentient beings because of loving kindness and compassion for them. And as was said, there are many methods. One of them is to use the breathing process, breathing in and out, as an aid for developing loving kindness and compassion for others, with the aim of becoming able to later on develop loving kindness and compassion to the extent where one is able to exchange the suffering of others for one's own good circumstances. And here, to begin with, at the beginner level, there is the balanced state just mentioned, in terms of being balanced because selfish concerns are given up. And this can be achieved on the basis of considering the fact that other sentient beings are not different from oneself in that they, just like oneself, want happiness, they want to avoid suffering. That's a common denominator for for all individuals. And the fact that both happiness and suffering are experienced by everyone. It's not the case that some experience just one or the other. All of us experience both. And that makes for us being equal with respect to experiencing both. There aren't any differences between oneself and others in that regard. Of course, the degree of suffering or happiness, here you have variations, but basically this is a common denominator. Applying to each and every one without exception. Now, one gets used, or one makes oneself, by contemplative meditation here, used to think in this way, to see things in the light of that we're all very much the same, in that all of us want happiness and all of us want to avoid suffering, and all of us experience both. There isn't, if one looks at things from a very basic level, a difference of sorts between oneself and others. And one contemplates this fact from various perspectives. There are many details to this type of contemplative meditation, where one, to begin with, gets used to think in that way rather than continuing one's previous way of thinking, where the emphasis would have been on happiness for oneself is more important than the happiness of others, simply. So one does this type of contemplative meditation, and here one can use the breathing process as a tool while contemplating. Now, one contemplates this to the point where this becomes a habit, to think in this new way, as it were. So one has achieved the goal here in terms of this kind of training by way of contemplative meditation. There is a shift in one's mindset. One thinks in this new way, which is the way of thought taught in terms of the lifestyle of a so-called Bodhisattva, someone who is concerned with the welfare of others. And that's the first level of the meditation. In fact, it's the first level of any meditation, whatever the topic is. The second is that one cultivates that mindset then to the point where one is so familiar with or so used to thinking in this way that it becomes the way one thinks. One drops the previous way of thinking. One rather reacts with loving kindness and compassion towards others than anger, jealousy, whatever may have been the case previously. And And that's the second level of any type of so-called meditation. And then there is the third level where that, or where the new way of thinking, or where the new mindset continues effortlessly. The practitioner no longer needs to sit down and make use of certain methods, the beginner stage methods, because loving kindness and compassion are now to some extent naturally present within because of the previous training. So here one has become really familiar with this new way of thinking, or the new worldview, outlook, however one wants to phrase it. And then there is, that will result in being able to achieve the third of the three levels of any type of meditation, where the mindset is now firm and stable. The practitioner isn't wavered any longer by selfish motives and the like. And at this level, when cultivating that, taking it to higher levels, as it were, in the end, the practitioner does become able to exchange his own good circumstances for the suffering of others.
Perna, ta ngaransa lojong gamkache, ta lo mangbugene na ji lojong geja tenzo lep gamkache. Tene yang tashe ge lojong shekache. Ganga chegi yore de lojong la tempa ma thop du. Che dewa jing sin kamnan rojin da. Jikdin di na semjing tan chejin sen geja tibina. Dewa jing ronda yu kisha chire. Mangche wate tagarang ingire sambuto. Di indu penna ngaranzo chishe degi yore mato. Chonchib samba nguneji.
Now, in Buddhist centers, people do so-called mind training a lot. They do this kind of meditation, and have been doing so for many, many years. Some people even teach mind training to others. All of those things are usual in Buddhist centers. The meditation, those who have been long-term practitioners, as it were, teaching others, and so on. However, if the practitioner hasn't yet achieved the third of the three stages just described in brief, he hasn't really achieved the kind of change it takes to be able to exchange his own happiness or good circumstances for the suffering of others. Meaning he's not an entirely selfless person yet. That doesn't mean that the efforts have been wasted. That's not the point here. The point is just that it may not be that easy to embody loving kindness and compassion as one thinks, so that neither loving kindness nor compassion have any limitations in terms of what the practitioner is prepared to do for someone else. Now, if one asks practitioners, long-term practitioners,
Tape lo jong jing sen, genji la.
Yeah, there are practitioners who have taken this as their main practice, which is a good thing to do, and who very often proclaim that to others, perhaps also teach mind training to others. However, very often if one asks those practitioners the question, in terms of rebirth, what is your preference? Rebirth in the land of Devachen, a so-called pure land, or rebirth in this world? The answer one usually gets is rebirth in that pure land. And that's an indication of that this person really does not automatically, he has not cultivated loving kindness and compassion to the point where he would automatically said, oh, I'll prefer to return to a rebirth in an impure world system, a world like ours, in order to help those who are trapped in suffering here, rather than a rebirth where my circumstances are very different. Of course, very good for me. However, their efforts to relieve the suffering of others aren't needed, in that this so-called pure land is free of such circumstances. So it points to a measure of selfish motives still at hand. One should give careful thought to what mind training is about. These methods with the aim of developing boundless loving kindness and boundless compassion for others. These instructions, teachings, trainings, meditations are very profound. It's not just a matter of imagining, well, to begin with, seat oneself in the meditation posture, and then when breathing out, imagine or visualize that one gives all one's good circumstances to others, and then when breathing in, taking upon oneself the suffering of others. Did Sumginangla Dangpogi Kapsurva?
Yes, that love good.
Yeah. Because that's just the very beginning of this path, the very beginning of the first of the 3 stages of this path of so-called mind training in terms of loving kindness and compassion for others. So to sit on a meditation cushion and do this type of visualization, it is a method, yes, but it's at the very beginning stage. So one needs to inform oneself and apply oneself in studies of all stages of this path, and not start at the beginning and then not go further thinking that there is nothing more to this path, because that's not at all the case.
Lasso, that che yon to Tanipa Jetop Jineka.
And the 2 previous verses, 10 and 11, that we have gone through during the previous session, as was pointed out then, concerns contemplative meditation, and it was also explained during this previous session that you have the two phases known as meditation and post-meditation. Today we'll go on with verses 11 and 12, and they are concerned with post-meditation, what one does after formal meditation sessions. So in terms of post-meditation here, there are various instructions given by various masters of old. Now, some of them teach that a beginner practitioner can, even though he is just at the beginning, start out to train in the 6 paramitas, the 6 deeds which transcend the ways of the world in terms of generosity, ethics, and so on. So that's one path set forth by many masters of old in their writings in terms of their efforts to explain what the path of a bodhisattva is. Now others, like Togme Zangpo, give the advice that beginner practitioners should rather start out in post-meditation to train in converting, as it were, by way of various methods, adverse circumstances into an advantage on the path, something where one, or a situation which one learns from, and the effect of what one learns is that of making a change for the better in terms of the path of a bodhisattva. So the adverse circumstance converts or is converted to, as it were, an advantage on the path. And here the author Togme Zangpo devotes the next 10 verses to explaining how one does this, how one converts adverse circumstances into an advantage that is called an advantage because it makes for the practitioner making progress on the path to enlightenment. And the particular context here is the path of a bodhisattva. And the first of these 10 verses, here Togme Zangpo explains. Oh, sorry. Here Togme Zangpo explains how one converts an adverse circumstance such as losing what one has obtained because of theft and the like to one's advantage in terms of making progress on this path, the path of the Bodhisattva.
Teche yon tu ta Togme Zangpo song de karresana suta de chen wonki dag nor tamche chok kam cho tu jung na yang lü no jung na yang lü dong long je tu sum gewan nam dela no ga yase la yin se sholo ga degi tengi.
Here Togme Zangpo says, even if someone from great want steals all your wealth or has someone else steal it, dedicating to the thief your body, your enjoyments and your merit, past, present and future, is the practice of a bodhisattva.
Tandi tanda rawate penna mi yina rasonga sutha sange tak se gitsing dege bima yina yan ra mimayin pa yina ra tenche rangi nor yo nor longje
Longchi la kan ko go nor ma kona
yo nor sange der Rinpoche rinda wal ko yo mendo ta yunor longje segindo de la sodan de chin dag nor chi pusung do ore ngaran la yebe ngopo kanda kai bat nor
da de pena nor pachala ingo maravaya
jala ingo mare
so gi mingya pola sopa
ya kai na yang changma tho na yan ra koran rang ki ngös tho so na yan ra mi yin da ji tong ne tho ju na yan ra thela rang gi lü long je geve tsawa cho pa mo she ba de jase chong ju sa ba cho ge la lin de so de
so Togme Zangpo said, if someone, and someone, the word someone here, isn't just a reference to fellow human beings, it's a reference to any kind of sentient being, and Buddhism sets forth a number of categories here. You have the world of humans, you have the world of non-humans, you have the world of gods, and so on. So the word someone is a reference to any sentient beings. So, sentient beings, sorry. If someone steals all your wealth, he says, with the word wealth, you shouldn't just understand material wealth. There are many kinds of wealth. You can be a person who has great wealth as to knowledge, as to social status, as to reputation, and so on and so forth, as well as material wealth. If any kind of wealth is stolen from you, by another individual or an individual who has been instructed by someone else to do this, there is no difference. One should equally dedicate to the thief or those concerned with the theft one's own body, even all one's enjoyments and any kind of merit that one may be in the possession of, in terms of past, present, and future. And to do so is the practice of a bodhisattva.
That today round the never na semte
So when finding oneself in an adverse circumstance, like the one described here, the most important thing to begin with in terms of how one reacts to what has happened is to prevent the reaction of anger.
That day, Panangaran Rauchi the Yena, Latin Bobe Consare, the Daginergy Jejunal, Gatic Tangbottle, Troshona, young, Gating Nipatella, some much tongue sort.
Of course, for a beginner practitioner, it might be difficult to feel no anger at all when this kind of thing happens to one. However, once the anger has surfaced, one should try to immediately give thought to the fact that from the viewpoint of the path of a bodhisattva, this reaction is not constructive. It's not going to help me make progress. It's in fact inappropriate.
That's not condition tang persona. Panandana sungare, Shivalage sungyore.
Kava Dina.
Tene sungyore, Tangpo, Chödrak Mikwaranla, Rawan Sawan Yomare, Nyom be Yewan to Chursonre, Kaki, some much dance.
So it's explained here in brief. Of course, there are more details as to how one conducts oneself in this situation in a commentary which explains these verses. And there is also the writings of an Indian Buddhist master of old, Shantideva, very known for detailed and precise instructions as to the path of a bodhisattva. Now, in terms of both this and other commentaries to this text and what Shantideva said, it's, as was just said, it may prove difficult for a beginner practitioner to not initially react with anger. However, when that happens, the advice is that the practitioner should consider the fact that the person who committed the theft is a person in the grip of afflictive, obscuring states, to the point where he has no control over how he acts. He is inspired by afflictive, obscuring states to the point where he enacts them. In this case, he commits theft. So one should consider that since he's in the grip of that mindset, he doesn't himself have the power to be measured in his actions. He isn't able to hold back and act according to a more ethical way of life, namely choosing to not commit the theft. He's in the grip of desire for what he wants to steal, to the point where he can't but do just that. commit the theft.
내가 나신게 딱 고랑게 녀문배 영원도 송네 랭인지 싸고요와. 되게 고랑을 내고요.
Furthermore, this person has therefore committed a so-called evil deed, which will have consequences in the future, in terms or in the context of the so-called law of karma. So he himself, one should give thought to, will encounter adverse circumstances and therefore suffering in the future because of this deed.
디인데 딱고 랭인데 썩도 코랑은 너빠제브라 마도 yin kayang marwa.
So in fact, the thief is not at all benefited from having acquired whatever wealth he acquired in this way. It's going to work against him. It's not going to benefit him in any way or shape or form. In the end. In fact, this person is to some extent mentally ill, and one should view him the way one would view one's only child, who perhaps, or one's only child in the situation of that child having a mental illness. One should contemplate, how would I feel if my child had a mental illness? How would I feel towards my child? Presumably, one would have sentiments of compassion for one's child. And that's exactly the kind of sentiments that one should have for the person who committed the theft. Because he's no different from someone who has a mental illness, whether it's one's own child or someone else.
Mende nyodere seyate kandechil den segundo teotang nyamba sangite. Koran nyamba teyang kol ramon mebar den nyogi harwan.
Now, a person with a mental illness has an illness, and the reason one labels this sort of disease a mental illness is because the person in question, it's not possible for that person to change his mindset, as it were. That's why one speaks of an illness. You see, it's much the same as a physical disease. If someone is struck down by a terminal illness, let's say cancer, there is not much that person can do in order to recover other than put his or her trust in medications and treatments that can perhaps help him. One has lost control, in that case, over the health of one's body. A mental disease is the same. There is not much the person can do. The person has simply lost control over the health of his mindset. And it's exactly the same. That's why both are called illnesses. An illness is something where the individual has lost control, other than putting his or her hope in treatments and medications that will perhaps cure him. But the person himself doesn't have any possibility whatsoever to influence the course of the illness. So the person who commits the theft is someone who has lost control over his mental health because of his desire for whatever he steals. So he does suffer from a mental disorder. It is a mental disorder. So, in fact, if you give thought to this, worldly individuals are all afflicted by mental disorders. From the perspective of the path of a bodhisattva, at least, to one degree or another. All are mentally ill. It's just a matter of the degree of the illness. Here you have variations, of course. Some are afflicted to a higher degree than others. However, there isn't a single worldly individual who does not have any mental disorder or illness. All do. So one should think of the thief in the light of what was explained, in order to understand that this person acts the way he does because of a mental disorder, and therefore he deserves my compassion rather than my anger. Next, the author goes on to explain that, in fact, all sentient beings, in the light of the principle of reincarnation, have been one's mother, have been a parent, and therefore shown one great kindness in one or many lifetimes even. Therefore, they are deserving of me trying to help them in their difficult circumstances. In this case, the circumstance of the mental, a mindset of mental disorder because of afflictive obscuring states. Why, one should ask oneself, should I react with anger? I should rather react with loving kindness towards them. Now, of course, this mindset, just described in brief, requires a comprehensive knowledge on the part of the practitioner of the principle of reincarnation, what reincarnation involves, how it works, and so on and so forth. If there is a good knowledge of the workings of reincarnation, then it is possible for the practitioner to react with loving kindness and compassion rather than anger. Of course, if on the other hand the practitioner doesn't have a good knowledge of the workings of reincarnation, reactions of anger and the like would happen.
대가는 신기 윤생 숨바데 내 상제당 상줍 삼바청
Sumpa, känta ni kan.
당군이 니빠 삼바.
Oh, so rather than a reaction of anger, one, according to the path of a bodhisattva, cultivates loving kindness and compassion for the individual who have created problems for one, whatever the problems may be. The third perspective here is
상제다 상줍 삼바 청마 공부를 쭉네 샘진데 청만랑에 랑 부포모 파마 분신 따위 제네 펜 따기 신 남자등에 롱여러와 상줍 샘지
one should remind oneself as a practitioner of the path of the bodhisattva that one began this part by, in the presence of all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, pledging to train and train on the path of a bodhisattva, and the training one pledged involves focusing on the welfare of others because of cultivating loving kindness and compassion for all sentient beings. So one has actually in the past pledged to do this. One has pledged to react with loving kindness and compassion towards others, rather than anger, jealousy, whatever afflictive, obscuring state of mind is at hand. One has pledged to give up and eradicate those states, replace them with loving kindness and compassion for others.
라소 되네 다 텐자회 삼마땅땅들 양내 양도 삼마땅 감주나 때 예망여서 미치겠네 제용도 양에 파초쇼고 말해서
And the training is about to train in loving kindness and compassion to the extent where at one point one's automatic reaction or one's reaction on the spot, as it were, when something or when a difficult situation is encountered, that one's reaction is one of loving kindness and compassion, not anger.
다티 인도 니갑 니제데 벤나 상집 셈베 니제 송자 셈진 탑제를 감고군도야.
And here, loving kindness and compassion is explained in the context of a true bodhisattva. 되네?
벤 남주 동네게 나르 셈진 지랑한 니제 미고군도야.
Ah, yeah.
감들랑 안저 참아 냠바다 질 선단.
Here, the focus in particular is on others who have inflicted harm, who have made problems for one, and the importance of not reacting with anger here, but rather loving kindness and compassion. At beginner levels, of course, one focuses, in order to train in loving kindness and compassion, on someone who suffers. And it's not all that difficult to have kind sentiments towards someone who is in difficult circumstances, for most people at least. But here we're not talking about that beginner level training in loving kindness and compassion. Here we're talking about really affecting, in consequence of one's training, a change in one's mindset, so that one reacts with loving kindness and compassion towards the individual who in one way or another have made problems for one.
Na la so ta ti je ta la den sin ni patere de rang la ne pa chi she chong na ne pa te ni lam du cher chu de.
And in the next verse, the circumstances described are circumstances of, from our perspective, great distress and difficulty, as it were. And the point again the author makes is that even in such difficult or adverse circumstances, one's response should be one of loving kindness and compassion in order to be able to convert those adverse circumstances into an advantage that translates to progress on the path of a bodhisattva.
La so ti che de ta de zasik dawate dala nyepa chongse me jin tu gong da da gen go jue she na yang ni je wang ki de ye pa nam dala nam ba ja se la li yin song de.
And here the author says the following: even if someone cuts your head off for having done nothing wrong, to take on that person's negativities, his evil deeds, through the power of compassion, is the practice of a bodhisattva.
Chetsang this tanda rawate ngarang ke ngama phan de pache manyo tata che ge me maung bana che sem chan me ba yin na yang yin da chi ge ngal kan thut ne pa she ne thar tu nge so bong bo thar de ngo che so na yang ti chen kin de la ni je gam ba ma to ni je gam rang ge khu dik pa nam rang lo jong gun chul len thap rang ge gewa tang dewa kan ga kol pha tre thap chi sam na tang go re song.
So here the author says there might be a person whom I have never ever thought of mistreating in any way, in the present and in the future. And I have also never mistreated this person at all. So I'm innocent in terms of having made problems for this other person. Even so, that person attacks you, may even murder you, even though you have never done anything wrong. You've never mistreated this other person. You're completely innocent in that regard. And in that situation, one should again respond with compassion. A compassionate mindset where one takes upon oneself the consequences of this evil deed and other evil deeds this person may have committed. And think of giving all one's own good circumstances and merits to that person. To think in this manner is the practice of a bodhisattva.
Tan dela pen sama tang tang da de de nang go ya de song de pen na ko nyom be yin do song ke lengin sa yun tu pen na rang de junor tro ba yin na Serap Tamjet ko Urbachagrava. Rana Dungde Las of Shabayina, Seramong Boloko Nejang, Nadin Chagrava Nadrach. Dagan Ashingi, Tene. Gona son to Gazi, Nankin son to Nanki son to Treba, Nanki son to Chadigroya. One at Tani Chagre. Tagan Ashinge, Nase Chona, Konyavala of the Nation Rogrova. Tindreg number member Chile Sama Tanda, Konjim Vichakami was shocked.
So, again, think of this person as in the grip of afflictive, obscuring states, a mental illness. And think about his future circumstances because of what he has done. Now, if it's the question of theft, as described in the previous verse, the consequence for this person is that perhaps in this life and in future lives, he'll take rebirth in circumstances of poverty. That's the effect of his own actions. And if it's a question of him injuring you physically, the effect for him is that perhaps even in this life, however in future lives, he will be afflicted by various physical illnesses, disorders and the like, in circumstances of having injured you. And if he murders you, well, the consequence there is rebirth in a so-called hellish existence where the circumstances of suffering are quite awful, as it were. So rather than reacting with anger, one should consider the consequences for the person who enacted what has occurred, the future circumstances for this person, in order to not fall into the trap of personal anger towards this person, but rather the arising of a reaction of compassion for him.
Tagana shinge rangi dewa tang gewa la sokpa kola par tende sambe shamba.
And one should also foster loving kindness here, which primarily focuses on wanting good circumstances for others and the person who inflicted the harm. One should rather want for him happiness, good circumstances and the like.
Rangi ta ne pache se lun den rawa chil ye te yang ngara charam me le chil den de longarwa kon ne pashin kin te yang thu ne ngal ne pache ju te yang charam me le kin de ba chi ngara ni ka le kin de ba le den de shongare sam le da ga che.
One should also consider accepting the situation in the light of a good knowledge of the workings of cause and effect. Why does this happen to me at all? Well, simply because in some previous lifetime, or in perhaps in this lifetime, I have enacted something similar with respect to this person in a previous lifetime. So there is the so-called law of karma, the workings of cause and effect, that play a role here. So in the present perspective, one is innocent, but not from the perspective of deeds enacted in previous lifetimes. There are causes for why this is happening to me. And one needs to consider that situation in the light of the workings of cause and effect as well, in order to make progress on the path of a bodhisattva.
Pen Ayardeva can de page song.
Aryadeva?
Yeah.
No, so?
Meeting Jongbo Sine, meeting Memayinki, you simne, Shadon Jet, the true de Guiana, Mimba Kebachi, Gay, Ned pattern of Chigamato, call a young name to try and have a chigma song. Membatik.
Koran lägger till den Koran la nöpa till jöna membadik.
Mare, Michi Pena Sim le Troops ne Kit out short one, Membeku ne the Pashat of Chegamato, Kond Martin Dopores and Copa Zengmare Chevy.
Nepadilla.
Oh.
Yeah. For example, a physician, someone of the medical profession, the Indian Buddhist master of old Aryadeva explained, in order to give an example to put what was said into a context. Imagine that the physician, perhaps specialized in mental disorders, a patient comes to him, someone who is in the grip of a mental disorder, perhaps to the point where the person in question is violent. He may even physically attack the physician because of his mental disorder. He might be disturbed to that point. How would the physician react? He wouldn't try to remove the patient. He wouldn't try to take revenge on the patient for having hit him. He would try to calm him down and see what he could do to help him. That's the kind of reaction the path of a bodhisattva would like to see when circumstances such as the ones that were described happen to the practitioner. So the physician doesn't view the patient as an enemy he needs to remove. He views him as a patient, someone who needs his help and assistance, and tries to give that to him. Similarly, Buddha Shakyamuni never view individuals in the grip of afflictive, obscuring states as enemies. He viewed them as objects of compassion, individuals deserving of his compassion rather than aggression.
Mare nyepa tang kurte tang jenge tang de churi changmate.
Da kanga kyengen rava.
Rede jenge lamdu chetu sholoka chu yorwa.
Dina yorwa.
Ya dina sholoka chu songdo.
Ladu.
Di tan jeshin jeba de chönjuk nang la zebe lewu to something lewu chö nang to song ya de.
Yeah.
Tang ngan zo ti nang to song sha ba de nge jön juk chak ka xie xu bi yin de ba. Europe show. Ti yin de pe xie ge le ja ma sha ba che. Tene rang ju de chun ro tu ta che. De ga nang xin ge transcription lo de ba ma yin ba. Rang sim ju ge de chu lo zhe da ha chang ge cham re sam. Mato denza ta ga se ge ja ro.
Den transcription yang dordyra va?
Dordyra va.
Chade yang ni chago gera va?
Ja, ni ka gel sur sembenan chere tum. De so taphi ji tabro ba pesha singit.
Yeah. So
Dondu nge nyam ning gel rogoro va.
Now we've gone through today 2 of the 10 verses where the author gives instructions in terms of how one converts adverse circumstances into an advantage on the path of a bodhisattva for the sake of making progress on that path. Now, there is the treatise known in Sanskrit as the Bodhicharya Avatara, engaging in the deeds of a bodhisattva, authored by Shantideva, where many more details are given, in that this is a more lengthy composition. And in terms of the topic here, namely converting adverse circumstances into an advantage, that perspective is explained at length in the chapter which sets forth patience, and in the chapter which sets forth samadhi or stable meditation states in the Bodhicharya Avatara. And Khenpo Rinpoche says, as many of you will know, he has taught the Bodhicharya Avatara a couple of times in Europe, in different Buddhist centers here. And he recommends that you read that treatise, the Bodhicharya Avatara, as well as the 37 practices of a bodhisattva. Also, as he has taught the Bodhicharya Avatara previously, those of you who have transcripts could read those. However, it's also very important to read the actual treatise or text. One has to keep in mind that a transcript is just that, a transcript of explanations giving during a series of lectures, where, depending on the length of the course, however, in most cases, in Western Buddhist centers, people do not have much time, so a lot of the courses are about summing up an extensive topic. That's why just a transcript is never enough in order to acquire a comprehensive knowledge of a topic, comprehensive to the point where the practitioner can actually practice the instructions in a comprehensive and constructive manner. And also, when you read either the text itself or a transcript, it shouldn't be about just reading it and sort of not go much further. One needs to repeat, one needs to contemplate, one needs to integrate, one needs to give careful thought to the explanations. So, a detailed, comprehensive, careful approach is needed in order to actually understand the topic, taught, which includes then both studies of the text in great detail and with good guidance, as well as perhaps reading transcripts from courses where the topic has been taught. However, the transcript alone is never sufficient. One needs to do the actual studies. The transcript is simply a study tool.
Lasso, tatagachena. Sunam de damje zagwanye, tolne nyebe dranam pamjet, jagana je balap truwa ye sigbe, solen drowa drowa.